Whatever nationality or social status a person may be, the main objective of the labor movement is to protect the common interest of workers, such as wages, working hours, and safer working conditions. During the Industrial Revolution, labor movements were created because there was a rampant imbalance in the society. The workers were not getting rich as their bosses take more profits by paying them low wages for long hours, roughly around 100 hours a week. Fed up with the situation, industrial workers created unions to fight for better conditions. According to History.com, the earliest recorded strike was held by journeyman tailors due to wage reduction in 1768. But the formal union organization began in 1794 when the Federal Society of Journeymen Cordwainers was established for the shoemakers in Philadelphia. And that federation was a jumpstart to the creation of more local unions in different cities to standardize their wages and demand for a shorter workday during the Industrial Revolution. From then on, unions are considered the backbone of the labor movement. Aside from the long working hours, low wages, and wage reductions, another issue that triggered the labor movement was the involvement of child labor. These children also worked for long hours, from early mornings to late evenings, in factories, farms, retail outlets, and even inside their homes. But by 1881, the unions demanded that businesses should stop hiring kids under 14 years old. Eventually, the protest got results and child labor ended. Although child labor issue was addressed, the labor movement still did not end. The most famous strike in the US was the Haymarket riots that happened in Chicago on May 1, 1886, involving thousands of people who took their protests in the streets and fight for their labor rights. In an article released by Rappler.com, this event on May 1 is officially recognized as a public holiday in 66 countries. But in the US, Labor Day is celebrated on the first Monday of September. After years of protests, the labor movement achieved success when the US Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act that was signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on June 25, 1938. The act granted the 40-hour work week, the regulated child labor, and the standards for minimum wage and overtime pay. According to UnionPlus.org, the most famous union remains to be the American Federation of Labor, or AFL, that was founded in 1881 by Samuel Gompers. AFL had approximately 1.4 million members at its peak and had been successful in negotiating wage increases for its members and safe workplaces for all workers. In 1955, AFL partnered with Congress of Industrial Organizations under John L. Lewis. However, by 1970, their union power peaked, wherein its membership in the private sector started to decline up until now, while in the public sector, there was still a continuous increase in the membership. That membership decline was due to the following. First, the new forces in the economy that affect the unionized industries. Next, the market structures broke down. Then, the labor movement was restricted by the National Labor Relations Act. And lastly, the power of President Reagan's anti-union administration. According to the US Department of Labor, the 2015 union membership was just 11.1%, or 14.8 million workers of their entire working population. We now go to the Philippine setting by refreshing our minds that the country was colonized by Spain for 333 years. The Philippines then became a colony of the United States of America after the Spaniards had been defeated. In 1902, the first Philippine Union called Unión Obrera Democrática or Democratic Workers Union was created by Don Isabelo de los Reyes when he came back to the Philippines after being exiled to Spain. While in prison, he gained insights from jailed revolutionists on how to organize a labor union. Since then, De los Reyes was known as the father of liberation movement and an anti-colonial leader. The Philippines' first union struggled for just wages and working conditions of Filipino laborers in American firms. The union also claimed to resist the American colonial rule because every time the union held its strike, its military government forcefully restored order by imprisoning the strikers. De los Reyes was then imprisoned for 4 months but was released with a condition that he shall leave the Union. Since De los Reyes had already left the Union, the members elected Dominador Gomez as the new Union president. According to the Philippine Star, the first time Labor Day was observed was on May 1, 1903, similar to when Haymarket riots occurred. Gomez led a demonstration of over 100,000 Filipino workers from Plaza Moriones, Tondo to the gates of Malacañang Palace. They chanted slogans against the American imperialism and called on Governor General William H. Taft to grant an 8-hour workday and better working conditions for workers. Gomez was then arrested but was pardoned as long as he leaves the Union. Eventually, this union was dissolved in 1904. The dissolution of Unión Obrera Democrática Filipina enabled Governor General Taft to bring organizers of the American Federation of Labor in the Philippines. AFL and the American imperialism then formed Unión del Trabajo de Filipinas, which was a less confrontational type of unionism. According to Rappler, a group Congreso Obrero de Filipinas or Philippine Labor Congress began on May 1, 1913 from 36 labor unions of cigar makers, government employees, bookbinders, journalists, sailors, clerks, mechanics, and lawyers. The Philippine Labor Congress protested for the rights of Filipino laborers in American firms being forced to work for as long as 12 hours a day. But on Labor Day 1929, several members left the Philippine Labor Congress due to the manipulated election results and established Katipunan ng Anak Pawis headed by Crisanto Evangelista, a communist. But KAP was banned by September 1931 since the union was deeply influenced by communism. Even if Katipunan ng Anak Pawis was banned by the Americans, that did not stop Evangelista to organize and lead a new group called Partido Comunista Pilipinas or Communist Party of the Philippines, while another group, the Socialist Party of the Philippines, was established and led by Pedro Abad Santos, who was a Katipunero Ilustrado and had also been captured by the Americans, maybe because his unionism approach was also a confrontational type which the Americans never liked. After 37 years of US colonialism, the Americans withdrew its government rule by 1935 and gave the Philippines the freedom to govern internal matters but still under the protection of American military presence. And that led to the start of the Commonwealth of the Philippines. During the Commonwealth, The country was invaded by Japan in 1942, but its rule only lasted for 3 years as the tables were turned in 1945.
On February 3rd, American troops marched into Manila. Their aim was to end Japan's 3-year-long occupation of the Philippines. Oscar Buenconsejo fought alongside the US Army during the battle. He witnessed the toll fighting took on the city's residents. Once defeat was in sight, Japan's troops set fire to huge swathes of Manila. And they committed atrocities against the civilian population, including mass murder and rape.
And in the final days, they were losing.
They were losing talaga. At the last
And they were
days,
given the
they were
order.
given an order. Kill every Filipino you see. See? Yan ang order.
That was the order, and that's what they did.
On March 3rd, the battle ended with a victory for the American and Filipino forces. But the city, once known as the Pearl of the Orient, lay in ruins.
Again, Japanese colonization only lasted for 3 years because by 1945, the American-Japanese War occurred when the Americans, led by General Douglas MacArthur, helped the Philippines to be free from Japanese invasion. Going back to labor during the war, the Socialist Party of Abad Santos merged with the Communist Party, which was led by Vicente Lava. Then after the war, the merger reappeared as the Congress of Labor Organizations, which was led by Amado V. Hernandez, Guillermo Cappadocia, and Mariano Balgos. 1 year after the Japanese soldiers were defeated, the Americans fully granted Philippine independence by July 4, 1946. But the Philippines officially recognized its independence on June 12, 1898, to commemorate its freedom from Spanish colonialism. On June 17, 1953, Republic Act 875, or the Industrial Peace Act, was decreed during the term of President Elpidio Quirino. Since there was a rampant control of communists on labor, especially on collective bargaining, this led for the CLO to be disqualified as an organization and its officers to be imprisoned, while those non-communist leaders formed new federations such as Philippine Association of Free Labor Unions, Federation of Free Workers, National Confederation of Trade Unions, and the Philippine Trade Union Councils. From 1953 until 1972, there were 4 Philippine presidents, namely Ramon Magsaysay, Carlos P. Garcia, Diosdado Macapagal, and Ferdinand E. Marcos. But that Industrial Peace Act in 1953 did not last until September 21, 1972.
My countrymen, as of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law. This proclamation was to be implemented upon my clearance, and clearance was granted at 9 o'clock in the evening of the 22nd, last night. I have proclaimed martial law in accordance with the powers vested in the President by the Constitution of the Philippines.
Due to the martial law, a new Communist Party of the Philippines existed in the 1970s that became an underground movement and was led by Jose Maria Sison. Then on May 1, 1974, President Marcos signed Presidential Decree 442 and enforced the Labor Code. Eventually, a labor center called the Trade Union Congress of the Philippines, or TUCP, was established to represent and control labor in the tripartite system of the labor relations in the country. This authoritarianism on labor during Marcos' dictatorship led to the creation of Kilusang Mayo Uno, or the May 1 movement, which was organized in 1980 by Felixberto Olalia, Cipriano Malonzo, and Crispin Beltran. Despite being in martial law, it seemed that the confrontational type of unionism was reborn, especially when Filipinos gathered together and conducted series of popular demonstrations in 1986 to end the martial law and begin a new era of freedom and democracy.
Do solemnly swear
that
I will faithfully
and conscientiously
fulfill my duties
as President of the Philippines,
to serve and defend its fundamental law,
preserve and defend its fundamental law,
execute its just law, do justice to every man, and consecrate myself to the service of the nation. So help me God.
That President Marcos or ex-President Marcos was seen in Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, and there is now a TV news on Guam that Marcos is in Guam.
During the Aquino administration, new labor centers began to exist, such as Labor Advisory Consultative Council, and under LACC are Kilusang Mayo Uno, Federation of Free Workers, Lakas Manggagawa Labor Center, and even Trade Union Congress of the Philippines. On May 1, 1986, President Cory Aquino gave new labor law reforms such as extending the right to strike, ease in filing a petition for a union certification election, and the abolishment of authoritarian labor legislation. But her labor reforms were protested by Filipino and foreign businessmen and were eventually modified. In addition, the businessmen accused Labor Minister Augusto Sanchez being too pro-labor and suspected him a communist. So after serving for only a few months, Sanchez was removed from office by Aquino in order to please her business supporters. Since there were modifications on labor, various groups led by Kilusang Mayo Uno held national strikes in 1987, 1989, and 1990. Aside from labor issues, KMU became popular in holding strikes due to the increase in prices in petroleum products, heightened conflicts with authorities, and participated by professionals and middle-class groups. Fast forward to the recent time, the International Labour Organization is the sole tripartite United Nations agency since 1919, involving 187 of 195 countries in the world. The ILO website stated that some 600 national trade unions, industrial federations, and plant-level unions from private and public sectors are registered in the Philippines. These 600 registered Philippine organizations only represent 10% of the 38.8 million strong workforce whose concerns are decent work for those who seek job and job preservation for those who are employed. Some of the mentioned organizations in the website were Federation of Free Workers, Kilusang Mayo Uno, and Trade Union Congress of the Philippines. Aside from examining the labor code and its provisions, the ILO partners with several organizations in order to eliminate child labor, youth unemployment, gender inequality, and discrimination, to better control the relocation on labor, and to provide more social protection and dialogue. In summary, the labor movement enabled us to learn the following. First, current employees enjoy the regulated wages, benefits, working hours, and working conditions, all thanks to the labor movement spearheaded by the workers during the Industrial Revolution. Next, although the labor code may have more weight on labor, but the labor movement should not suppress nor destroy capital. In fact, business owners were also given the chance to protest and protect capital during the Aquino administration. Lastly, labor movements play a vital role to safeguard social justice, democracy, equality, and human rights.